Today we have a tale of greed, theft, and murder in the heart of Appalachia, in coal country in Hurley, Virginia, where a grisly murder occurred on September 21st, 1909. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
Well, Steve, we go back to the beginning, really the dawn of the 20th century, with life in southwestern Virginia, in coal country, especially with Hurley, Virginia, where this grisly murder occurred in 1909. And, just as sensational as murder cases might be today, this one was probably a little bit more sensationalized, considering everything that went on with it.
Well, there were a lot of things going on with this back in 1909, and you're right, it was sensationalized, made a lot of the newspapers, not just in Appalachia, but outside as well,
right,
due to the horrendous nature of the crime itself. Elizabeth Justice, also known as Betty, was the widow of Hiram Justice, a Confederate veteran who had died in 1905. Now, Betty owned a 150-acre tract of land in Buchanan County along Laurel Creek. In July of 1909, she sold the timber rights to that land to the W.M. Ritter Lumber Company of Hurley. Well, the company gave her $1,500 for the timber, a tidy sum in those days, and she traveled to Hurley to collect her payment from the company's agent and foreman, a man named Howard Little. She took the money and headed on back home to stash it about the house. For you see, in those days, folks in the mountains either didn't have access to a bank or they didn't trust banks and felt safer keeping their cash closer to home.
Well, after Hiram had passed away, Betty moved in with her daughter and son-in-law, Lydia and George Meadows, and their children near Hurley. On the night of September 21st, Howard Little stopped by the house, and he asked to spend the night. By 9 o'clock, Betty, Lydia, George, and their 3 boys were in bed asleep. Not long after that, Little went to work. Taking a hatchet, a knife, and a pistol, he began to kill each family member, one by one. He then found the $1,500 and set the cabin on fire to cover his tracks, and he took off. The resulting fire alerted the neighbors, most of whom were relatives of the Ms. Justice and the Meadows, and several of them arrived to find the house engulfed in flames, and reportedly, one of them found the Meadows' youngest child, Lafayette, still alive. When they tried to get him to safety, Lafayette somehow managed to fall back down into the burning house, where he was also burned to death. The next morning, family members and neighbors searched through the ruins of the house and found the bodies of the Meadows family and of Betty Justice. George Meadows was found with 2 bullet holes through his neck, along with a huge wound to his neck from the hatchet. He was also mutilated so badly that his head had been nearly cut off. When they found Betty Justice, they found that she had actually been decapitated. Police were called in, and they brought in their bloodhounds. That was one of the first things you did back in those days. And an investigation was led by a detective from Bluefield, Alex C. Hufford, who concluded that it was Howard Little who had committed the murders, and soon a posse, that's the next thing after the bloodhounds, a posse was organized to go in search of the murderer. The pinpointing of Little was helped a little bit by his wife, Matilda.
Matilda and Howard Little were separated and had been so for several years. While she still cared for him, all that ended in early October when she found out that Howard was planning to head out west with another woman. That woman named Mary Stacy, and we can presume that the money he stole from Betty Justice was going to fund that trip. Matilda contacted authorities to tell them of suspicious wounds on her ex-husband's neck and of a bloody shirt that he forced her to clean the day after the murders. She also told of being ordered not to inform anyone about the clothing under threat of death. The investigators came to the little property in Bull Creek, West Virginia, and found a lantern belonging to the Meadows, as well as a large sum of cash, presumably what was left over of that $1,500 paid for the Justice timber, and that he was planning on leaving the county, presumably with the other woman. Now, the clincher in the case, though, was when they located a .32 caliber pistol at Little's house. The police determined that the pistol had been borrowed by Little from a friend and had been used in the murders. They exhumed George Meadows' body and recovered 2 .32 caliber slugs, which turned out to match shells from the pistol that Little had borrowed.
Little didn't seem like he wanted to cover up his tracks too much out of this. This stuff was easily found, wasn't it, Steve?
I guess he felt safe there with his ex-wife. I don't know why, but, yeah, you're right. He didn't seem to really care one way or the other at that point from that perspective.
It's kind of weird. But Howard Little was soon arrested and then taken to the Russell County Jail in Lebanon to be held due to fears that he would be taken from the jail in Grundy and, you guessed it, lynched before the trial. That sort of thing happened in Appalachia on a regular basis when these things happen. Well, that trial took place in November of 1909 in Grundy, and in a 3-day trial, Little was found guilty of the murders of Betty Justice, George Meadows, Lydia Meadows, and their 3 sons. He was sentenced to die on January 7, 1910, but Virginia Governor Claude A. Swanson granted a 30-day stay so that Little's lawyers could file an appeal. Now, in the meantime, local authorities decided to move the murderer to a jail cell in Roanoke, since the murders had inflamed the good people of Buchanan County, and there was no way to guarantee his safety in that county or in neighboring Russell County pending his appeal. But unfortunately for Howard Little, the Virginia Supreme Court quickly denied his appeal, and he was executed on February 11th, 1910.
Interestingly, Rod, Little had once been a U.S. Marshal in eastern Kentucky, where he was involved in a gun battle with a man named George McKinney, in which McKinney was shot and killed. Now, Little had been tried and sentenced to a life sentence for the killing, but was pardoned by the governor of Kentucky, then came to Buchanan County, I guess to kind of get away from all that, and took that job of foreman of the Ritter Lumber Company, and then y'all know the rest of that story.
Mm-hmm. You familiar with the Ritter Lumber Company?
Not a whole lot. I know you and I have talked about it and talked about these huge trees that they cut down, mainly because they were timbering and virgin forest up there.
Yeah. Well, I had family. I had some in-laws. I would say this: my uncle and his family, and a lot of other people over in the McClure area and around Nora, places like that in Dickinson County. That's where the W.M. Ritter Lumber Company was very highly involved. They were all involved through Buchanan County, Dickinson County, and some other counties close by. And they cut these trees, and man, the product of what they had was just incredible. Some of the finest and most sought after wood floors that you would ever find anywhere in the United States. And you know what? The rich were the ones that profited from it. They were the ones that got all those nice floors out of it, and I'm sure they got a cut out of it from stock perhaps in the Ritter Lumber Company. But then, like everything else, it seemed like when the big trees started drying up, so did Ritter Lumber Company's business before long.
Isn't that the way it always goes?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, folks, that's the story of the Laurel Creek murders in Hurley, Virginia. Another story that makes up part of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can subscribe to the audio version of the Stories podcast, where we have more stories just like this. You can do that at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, Audible, Odyssey, Google Podcasts, or if you don't like any of those, just download us on your favorite podcast app. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.